Joining us now here in San Francisco is Paul Kocher, president and founder of Cryptography, a leading security firm here in the Bay Area. So, Paul, first of all, I want to get your reaction to Operation Shady Rat, this report that was released by McAfee last week that showed 72 different organizations were targeted and that the servers originated in China.
Yes.
What was your take on this?
Well, there's sort of two ways to look at it. One is it highlights how much information these attackers are getting. The other thing that really jumps out is how amateurish and security ignorant the attackers were. They were leaving their own servers wide open for people to go and see what they were doing, yet any competent computer security person would have shut that down. So we're basically seeing that even the people who don't know what they're doing are successfully breaking into systems, and that's a really, really ominous sign.
So the question everyone wants to answer is China to blame here?
And the answer, nobody knows. Certainly, there are attacks originating from people in China. There are also many coming from Americans. And we have groups like the National Security Agency, whose job is to collect intelligence on foreign countries. Likewise, China has varying levels of national intelligence organizations interested in collecting information about us. And in some ways, it's just the spy to pawn dynamic being carried out in the digital arena, where it's much safer, much easier to collect data.
But if the servers originated in China or are based in Beijing and Shanghai, isn't it fair to assume that this is coming from China?
Absolutely not, because it's very easy to take one compromised computer and launder packets through it. So if I want to make an attack look like it came from China, all I need is one compromised computer in China. I can then send my malicious commands to that computer that will relay them on to the ultimate target. So all that tells you really is that a computer in China was the most recent source of the data being transmitted against the targets, but we have no idea who's actually controlling that server.
Now, the Chinese government has, of course, denied any involvement in this. A spokesperson for the Chinese embassy said, "I'd say that whenever there's a story coming out on cyberspace intrusions, there will be a willful finger pointing at China. This is simply abnormal and ridiculous, and we cannot but question the ulterior motives there." How do you respond to something like that?
Well, China's hands aren't clean, but neither are ours. So in a way, that denial is probably not fair. But at the same time, if you were to say we can't be sure it's not Americans behind it, we can't be sure it's not Koreans, Thais, pick a country. I mean, there are people in every country that are interested in stealing information. It's valuable and it gives your government more power. So it's a brave new world that we're working in, where you can't just know who is spying on you. You have to lock the systems down.
So is it ever possible to track these guys down?
Well, there's some things you can learn. Like there were some interesting things about this particular system where the control commands, like GF to get a file, PF to put a file, at least suggest somebody knew English.
What does that mean? That's a little down in the weeds for me.
When somebody wanted to pull data from a compromised machine, the command there was an English acronym for the operation to be done. So it suggests that whoever was working on this was at least fluent in English, but that doesn't mean that they're not from China. So I mean, you can kind of
doesn't mean much at all.
Try to look for little tea leaves. You can also look at the code and try to figure out if there are pieces of code in common between different pieces of malware. But
how likely is it that we will ever find who is responsible for this?
If the perpetrator is successful, we will never know. Only the failed perpetrators ever get traced, because when you're a spy, the very last thing in the world you want to do is have your identity uncovered.
So how can companies protect themselves? Are their hands tied?
Well, you can't really rely on the courts. It's really a defensive game. So making sure that your critical data is not online, making sure that you're running scanning software to see where connections are going in and out of your organization. In many ways, it means going back to the dark ages of not putting your data where people can get at it online, trying to have isolated clusters of computers. My company runs a completely offline network for the sensitive data we have. And it's kind of embarrassing as a security company to say, we don't know how to secure our internet connections, so we pull this data offline, but we have to do that.
Should we be afraid?
It depends who you are and what you're worried about. Information is getting stolen, but in many cases, it's better to have warfare going on in the cyber realm than in the physical realm. So it's not the kind of thing that most people lie awake at night, but it's my job to lie awake at night worrying about these things. So yes, I'm afraid, but you need to look at it with a certain degree of balance. This isn't the first time that espionage has been a problem in the world.
I guess it also depends on what kind of information is at stake. All right, Paul Kocher of Cryptography, always great to have your insights here on Bloomberg West. I'll try not to lay awake all night tonight thinking about this.